Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again, where, thanks to the very good, very kind people on Patreon, people like you, Josh Parham, I have the pleasure today of talking about a film that has been long recommended to me on this channel, but one that I really didn't have any idea about. I've talked many times on this channel about how the 1960s were spy crazy, and the catalyst for pretty much all of that was Bond. All of a sudden, spy movies were popping up all over, most of them derivative, cheaply produced European pictures, and some going so far as to cast no acting experienced brothers in lead roles purely because their name carried a certain cachet in the genre. I have a very limited knowledge of these spy-fi films, but what I have seen of them has just felt like cheap cash-ins and not much else. So I was slightly hesitant when it came to Our Man Flint, a film that I knew almost nothing about, bar it inspired Austin Powers and starred James Coburn as the titular character. Is it just going to be another 007 derivative without the amazing craftsmanship and quality control behind it? Well, actually, I was very pleasantly surprised. Our Man Flint was produced at 20th Century Fox in the US for a very reasonable budget for such a movie, and is a very classy, well put together production. Don't get me wrong, I can enjoy low budget and rough around the edges too, but when it comes to parodying Bond, a lot of spoofs fall down because they just don't have the money to emulate the same opulence that Bond does while appearing so effortless and casual. So my prejudice about production quality aside, what's the story here? Our Man Flint opens with a couple of disasters taking place as a result of especially bad weather that is being controlled by a trio of scientists who are also leaders of a group called Galaxy. They are going to keep causing problems for world authorities until their demands are met, that world governments abandon the use of nuclear energy and give up all their weapons.
We seek no master race. We are the friends of the common man. Surely you must have noticed the absence of guns here in our paradise.
Doesn't sound like the most despicable of schemes. I mean, these are the bad guys, really? I mean, today they'd be heroes, but okay, whatever. As a result of this, Derek Flint, played by James Coburn, is brought back into the fold from his early retirement by ex-boss Cramden, played by Lee J. Cobb, to do some sleuthing and foil the scientists and their plans. This takes the hero on a globe-hopping journey, encountering villains and getting into fights along the way. It's a relatively simple plot, but that's all well and good for a James Bond parody like this. The emphasis should be on the gags, of course, but saying that, I was actually quite surprised at how little full-blown comedy there was in this film. Knowing before going in that this was Mike Myers' biggest inspiration for Austin Powers, I was expecting something along the lines of that level of silliness, but really, while this is still very much a comedy, and there are some very funny gags throughout, it wasn't ever trying to be the laugh-a-minute spoof I suspected it would be, but that didn't actually matter because the story is very nice and the performances are really great, so even when it's a scene focusing on plot or character, or not trying to nudge you in the ribs, it's still actually very engaging. In terms of tone, the space between Flint and Bond is smaller than between Flint and Powers, if that makes any sense.
Hello, Flint.
008.
I wanted to work with you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Good boy.
James Coburn does a really fantastic job at maintaining the tone of the film and delivers a perfectly judged performance. Flint is, on the surface, a super ridiculous character. He's an expert at everything, he's the smartest man alive, he has a polyamorous relationship with several ladies who he shares a home with, and all that in the hands of someone like Mike Myers would give you something very different, but Coburn manages to make it all seem natural, like, oh yeah, obviously this guy would be able to do all this stuff and have all these things. He takes it seriously when he needs to, and he's not interested in mugging the camera. It's perhaps an understated performance in places, and that's perfectly right.
Flint, the world's in trouble.
It usually is, but it manages to extricate itself without my help.
Obviously, the fact that he's an expert at everything, and the fact that women, throw themselves at his feet everywhere he goes are takes on the James Bond character, but the film actually goes so far as to make the bold claim that Flint is actually better than Bond in a few places.
Now, this contains 65 weapons.
This has 82 different functions. 83 if you wish to light a cigar.
There's a scene where he's being given a Walther and an attaché case with a bunch of gadgets, and he's like, why would I need this crap? And there's a bit where he gets into a fight with a British agent known as 008, and of course Flint wins. I actually got some Johnny English vibes in some of these moments, like the bits in those films where English makes out that he doesn't need gadgets and he can just work something out by way of natural methods and training that he may or may not have experienced. The only other cast member who I'd heard of before was Lee J. Cobb, who plays Flint's boss Cramden, and I love this guy. His comedic timing is spot on, and one of my favourite bits in the whole film is where he goes to visit Flint and he rings the doorbell, and Flint has his dog trained to take visitors into the home by the cuffs of their shirts, and I love that dog, and I love Cobb, and I was laughing a lot during that scene.
Flint?
Lower your hand slowly and smile.
What?
If he senses hostility towards me, he'll rip you apart.
There is a Flint girl for this particular film in the form of Gila Golan, who starts as a bad girl, but is of course thawed by Flint's charms, but rather than just the pair of them ending up together, it's just like, oh, you can join my other concubines, and for as crazy as this is, it actually never comes across as seedy. It's just like, oh yeah, obviously this guy would share his home with all these fantastically beautiful women and they'd all be cool with him. I mean, like, he's a real ladies' man, obviously, and treats the ones he lives with very well, and I guess that's the difference between him and Bond. To Flint, women are meaningful pursuits, but why just settle for one? I know it's supposed to be a gag that he's living with all these fantastically beautiful women, but it actually plays as one of the only examples I can think of in mainstream Hollywood entertainment of a happy and pleasant polyamorous relationship, and for that to come out of the 60s is, yeah, it's something. The music is also fantastic. Jerry Goldsmith, of course, did the score, and he's one of the most iconic composers in all of Hollywood history, and I love the main Flint theme that is woven throughout the entire film. The film does fall down on a couple of elements for me, and one of those elements being the bunch of foes that Flint must do battle with. The trio of bad guy scientists don't actually get that much screen time, and for all of their mass destruction, actually play quite normal and, dare I say, reasonable. There is a much more callous villain in the form of Malcolm Rodney, played by Edward Mulhare, who is a lot more present and hateable, but he's a henchman really, and it's a shame that the trio of scientists aren't more fun, because the concept of a hive mind villain is really cool. I'm also not a huge fan of how the film is shot, and the visual appeal is somewhat lacking, I think. Now, don't get me wrong, the sets are fantastic and the costume design is wonderful, but just where the camera is, how scenes are lit, is just a bit dull. There are some good money shots, but on the whole I found the cinematography quite bland, and I guess this is intentional. I mean, it's a comedy, so you don't need to do anything pretentious, you just need to sell the humor, and usually I would agree with that, but here I just wanted a bit more razzmatazz to the camera work. It's just a bit flat. But those things aside, I did really enjoy Our Man Flint, and there's a lot here for spy movie fans to get something out of too. For a comedy, it's not exactly a laugh riot, but there's some funny scenes, good action, and a great central performance from James Coburn, bringing it all together, that if you're looking for an easy, relaxing movie to pass a rainy weekend afternoon, consider popping this in, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. So as always, thank you for watching, Bond fans. The next movie that I will be getting to in my non-Bond spy movie reviews has already been decided, and it will be Kingsman, which I'm very, very excited to have an opportunity to talk about. In the meantime, if you want to head over to my Patreon page, feel free, because on that page you can vote on what is going to come next in these non-Bond spy movie reviews, and the options for next month are going to be sequels to movies I have previously reviewed, so Mission Impossible 2, for example, Kingsman 2, and yeah, head over there to see what the rest are gonna be. And until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.